The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. The kind that makes every sound, every creak of a bench or shuffling of feet echo like thunder. At the center of it all stood Emily Parker. Just 10 years old. Gripping a threadbare stuffed bear in her tiny hands. She glanced nervously at the stern yet kind judge. Then at her mother, Lauren Parker, seated at the defense table. Lauren, known in Mapleton as the town's picture-perfect mother, sat rigid, her piercing green eyes locking onto Emily like a challenge, daring her to speak. Around them, the courtroom was packed with townsfolk, all eager to uncover the truth behind the headlines. With trembling hands but a steady voice, Emily took a deep breath and broke the silence. "She's not who you think she is." Gasps rippled through the courtroom as murmurs began to rise. The judge's gavel struck sharply, calling for order. But the damage was done. Everyone in the room was stunned. Could a child's words really unravel the image of Mapleton's beloved philanthropist? What secret had Emily uncovered? And why had she waited until now to tell the truth? This story is one of shocking secrets, betrayal, and unimaginable courage. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll unravel the mystery of Lauren Parker's double life, the devastating discovery Emily made in her own home, and the dramatic courtroom battle that would decide her future. Buckle up, because this is a story you won't forget. In the quaint town of Mapleton, Lauren Parker was the epitome of perfection. Known for her infectious charm and unwavering dedication to the community, Lauren was admired by everyone. She organized charity events, volunteered at local shelters, and never missed a chance to bake cookies for neighborhood kids. To anyone looking in from the outside, she was a role model, a shining example of what a loving mother should be. Her daughter, Emily, seemed to be the mirror of Lauren's success. With golden curls that bounced with her every step, wide brown eyes brimming with curiosity, and a laugh so bright it could light up a room, Emily was adored in Mapleton. At every community event, she stood dutifully by her mother's side, a symbol of Lauren's perfect parenting. Neighbors would often whisper, "She's such a delightful child, just like her mother." But appearances, as they'd soon learn, can be deceiving. Together, they appeared to be the perfect family, one that inspired admiration and envy in equal measure. But behind the closed doors of their cozy home, the reality was far darker. Emily's life was a far cry from the idyllic image her mother projected. Lauren's warmth and smiles disappeared the moment they were alone. The woman who charmed her way through Mapleton was gone, replaced by someone cold and exacting. For Emily, life was a series of harsh rules, impossible expectations, and punishments that far outweighed her mistakes. Emily had learned early to walk on eggshells. A single misstep, spilling milk, forgetting to finish her homework, or speaking out of turn, could unleash Lauren's fury. One night, after Emily accidentally tore a page from her workbook, Lauren hurled a glass across the room. It shattered against the wall, and Emily spent hours picking up the shards while Lauren stood silently, watching. The emotional scars were just as cutting. "You'll never be good enough," Lauren would say, her voice dripping with disdain. Over time, Emily learned to hide the bruises, both physical and emotional, beneath long sleeves and a practiced smile. The fear took root in her heart, isolating her from her friends and teachers. Even when someone asked if she was okay, Emily would force a cheerful response. Who would believe her? Anyway, Lauren was Mapleton's darling. The truth was suffocating. Emily felt trapped in a life that wasn't hers. Forced to keep her mother's secrets while the world continued to praise Lauren's perfection. But deep down, Emily knew something had to change. As the pressure mounted, so did her determination to finally break free. It was a cold, quiet night when Emily Parker found the box that would change everything. Her mother, Lauren, had left for a late meeting, and the house was unusually still. Emily, unable to sleep, wandered into the attic, a place she rarely ventured. Dusty beams and forgotten boxes surrounded her as she moved carefully across the creaking floorboards. A worn cardboard box tucked into a corner caught her eye. It was labeled simply, "Old Papers." Emily hesitated. Lauren had always told her to stay out of the attic, warning her it was dangerous and off-limits. But something about the box called to her. Heart pounding. She knelt and pried the lid open. Inside, Emily unearthed a treasure trove of secrets, old checks, financial records, and yellowed documents that seemed innocent at first glance. But as she flipped through the pages, her heart began to race. Numbers didn't add up. Donations that were meant for charities had vanished, replaced by cryptic bank transfers to accounts Emily didn't recognize. The realization struck her like a thunderclap: her mother's spotless reputation was a carefully woven lie. Her mother's name was everywhere, written in elegant, familiar handwriting. But that wasn't all. At the bottom of the pile was a faded birth certificate. Emily's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the one she had seen before. The name listed under "Mother" wasn't Lauren's, it was a stranger's, Samantha Miller. Her mind raced. What did this mean? Why had Lauren hidden this? The weight of what Emily had discovered was crushing. She paced the attic, clutching the papers, her thoughts swirling. Should she confront Lauren? Would anyone even believe her? After all, her mother had built a perfect image in Mapleton. Emily knew from experience that defying Lauren could have severe consequences. But this wasn't just about punishments anymore. It was about the truth. Days passed as Emily wrestled with her decision. She grew quieter, more withdrawn. At school, her teacher, Mr. Carter, noticed her distraction and asked if she was okay. Emily forced a smile, too afraid to share what she had uncovered. At home, Lauren carried on as though nothing was wrong, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her daughter. Finally, Emily made her choice. With trembling hands, she packed the documents into her school bag. She knew there was only one place where the truth could come to light: the courtroom. It was a terrifying thought, standing before a judge, exposing her mother's lies. But Emily also knew it was the only way to break free from the shadows of her mother's deceit. As she zipped her bag and placed it by the door, Emily whispered to herself, "I have to do this." She didn't know what would happen next, but she was ready to face whatever came her way. For the first time, she felt a flicker of hope. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as Emily Parker took the stand. Her small frame dwarfed by the imposing witness box. She clutched her stuffed bear tightly, a lifeline in the sea of eyes watching her every move. The judge, a stern but kind-looking man, nodded for her to begin. The room fell silent, save for the faint rustling of papers and the occasional creak of wooden benches. Emily swallowed hard, her voice trembling but steady as she began to speak. "I found something," something about my mom. She's not who you think she is." Gasps rippled through the crowd. And murmurs began to rise. The judge tapped his gavel sharply. "Order in the court." He turned back to Emily, his expression softening. "Take your time. Miss Parker. Tell us what you found." Emily nodded, her hands trembling as she gestured toward the box of documents she had brought. "I found these in the attic. They're papers, about money. About things my mom said she didn't do. And there's something else." Her voice broke slightly. But she pressed on. "There's a birth certificate. It says she's not my real mom." The courtroom erupted. Whispers grew louder. Heads turning in disbelief. Lauren Parker, seated at the defense table, shot to her feet. "This is absurd," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. "She's a child. She doesn't know what she's talking about." "Mrs. Parker, sit down," the judge commanded, his voice firm. "We will examine the evidence." The bailiff brought the box to the judge, who carefully opened it. As he sifted through the documents, his brow furrowed. Checks and bank statements detailed misappropriated funds from charities Lauren had managed. But it was the birth certificate that made him pause. This changes everything," he said quietly, his voice filled with gravity. Lauren's lawyer quickly stood. "Your Honor, this is a clear attempt to discredit my client. These documents could easily have been fabricated." The prosecutor, however, wasn't backing down. "Your Honor, the financial records match existing accounts under Mrs. Parker's name. And as for the birth certificate, we have reason to believe it is legitimate." Lauren's composed demeanor began to crumble. Her hands clenched the edge of the table, her face pale. "This is a witch hunt," she said, her voice less certain now. "I raised Emily. She's my daughter." The prosecutor stepped forward, his voice steady and deliberate. "Your Honor, the court has identified the individual listed on the birth certificate, Samantha Miller. She is present today and prepared to testify." The room froze, all eyes darting toward the doors as they swung open. A woman entered, her movements hesitant but purposeful, her eyes scanning the courtroom before finally resting on Emily. The courtroom froze as the doors opened, and a woman with kind but nervous eyes entered. Samantha Miller stood at the witness stand, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. She glanced briefly at Emily, her eyes brimming with emotion. "I gave birth to Emily," Samantha said, her voice shaky but firm. "I was young and scared. I thought adoption would give her a better life. But after the agency I worked with closed, I lost all contact. I tried to find her, but I never could." Lauren's lawyer interjected, his tone sharp. "Mrs. Miller, you have no proof that Emily is your biological daughter." The prosecutor held up a file. "We've requested a DNA test. Your Honor, the results will confirm the truth." The judge nodded. "This court will await the results. Until then, Mrs. Miller's testimony will stand as evidence." Emily sat frozen, her heart pounding as she tried to process everything. Samantha's words lingered in her mind. "I thought adoption would give her a better life." Could this stranger really be her biological mother? And if so, why had Lauren lied all these years? Lauren's voice cut through Emily's thoughts. "This is all lies. Emily is my daughter. I've raised her for 10 years. That's what matters. But even as she spoke, Lauren's confidence faltered. Her shoulders slumped. Her carefully crafted image cracking under the weight of the truth. The judge raised his gavel. This court will reconvene once DNA results are available. Until then, we are adjourned. The courtroom erupted into chaos as people whispered and reporters scrambled for details. Emily sat quietly, clutching her bear. Her mind a whirlwind of confusion and uncertainty. The truth was coming to light, but it was only the beginning. The battle for her future had just begun. The courtroom felt heavier than ever as the custody battle began. For Emily Parker, the tension was almost unbearable. On one side was Lauren Parker, the woman who had raised her, provided for her, and made her laugh during her happiest moments, but who had also caused her pain. On the other was Samantha Miller, her biological mother. A stranger who carried the promise of warmth and understanding but remained unfamiliar and uncertain. Emily's heart was torn between the only life she'd ever known and the possibility of something better. As the judge called the court to order, Emily sat quietly in her chair, gripping her stuffed bear. She had been called to testify. And though she was nervous, she knew it was her chance to share her truth. The judge looked at her kindly. "Emily, I understand this is very difficult. Take your time. We're here to listen." Emily took a deep breath and began, her voice shaking but clear. "Lauren has been my mom for as long as I can remember." Emily began, her voice trembling but clear. "She's taken care of me. And I've always thought she loved me. But, she's also hurt me. When she yells, it feels like I'm invisible. Like I don't matter. Sometimes, I go to bed scared. And I don't want to feel that way anymore." Tears welled in her eyes. But she continued. "Samantha. I don't know her. But she seems kind. I think she cares about me. I just want to feel safe and loved. That's all I want." Her words hung in the air, the simplicity of her wish cutting through the complexity of the case. The courtroom was silent as Emily sat down, her hands trembling. The first witnesses were called to testify in support of Lauren. Mrs. Walker, a neighbor and longtime friend of the Parkers, painted a glowing picture of Lauren as a dedicated mother. Lauren has always been involved in the community. She's organized food drives, helped at shelters, and been a wonderful role model. She loves Emily dearly. The next witness, a teacher from Emily's school, described Lauren's involvement in school activities. She was always there for parent-teacher meetings, school fundraisers, and class parties. You could see how much she cared. But as the prosecution took the floor, the tone shifted. Witnesses who had once worked with Lauren described a darker side. Margaret Allen, a former colleague, testified about Lauren's financial misconduct. "At first, I thought it was an error. Funds would go missing. And Lauren always had an excuse: emergency repairs or unexpected donations. But over time, the discrepancies grew. And I realized it wasn't a mistake. She was taking the money." An accountant, Mr. Hayes, confirmed the allegations with detailed records of misappropriated funds. "The evidence is clear. Mrs. Parker used her position to funnel money into personal accounts. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate." The testimony painted a stark contrast to the woman the neighbors had described. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, the weight of Lauren's deceit becoming harder to ignore. Finally, it was Samantha's turn to take the stand. She hesitated briefly, her hands trembling as she adjusted the microphone. Looking at Emily, she began to speak, her voice soft but steady. I was young when I had Emily, barely an adult myself. I didn't have the means to take care of her. I was scared, alone. And I thought adoption would give her a better life. I thought I was doing the right thing. Her voice cracked slightly, and she took a deep breath. When the adoption agency closed, I lost all contact. I tried to find her, but I couldn't. And now, I know I made mistakes. I know I missed so much of her life. But I've never stopped thinking about her. I've never stopped wondering if she was happy, if she was safe. Tears streamed down her face as she continued. I don't want to take her away from everything she knows. I just want to be part of her life. I want to give her the love and safety she deserves, even if that means starting slowly. I don't want to force anything, I just want to try. Her plea was raw and heartfelt, her sincerity filling the room. Even Lauren's lawyer hesitated before beginning the cross-examination. When the arguments concluded, the judge called for a recess to deliberate. Emily sat quietly in a corner of the courthouse with Mrs. Jensen, her temporary guardian. Her thoughts swirled in a mix of confusion and fear. Lauren had raised her, but her punishments and lies had left scars Emily couldn't ignore. Samantha seemed kind and genuine, but Emily didn't know if she could trust someone she had only just met. When the court reconvened, the judge looked somber. This is a complex case, he began, with no easy answers. However, the evidence of financial misconduct and the testimony presented today raise serious concerns about Mrs. Parker's fitness as a guardian. At the same time, it is clear that Emily's bond with Mrs. Parker cannot be ignored. Similarly, Mrs. Miller has shown a sincere desire to reconnect with her daughter. But their relationship is new and will require time to grow. The judge's next words echoed in Emily's mind. To prioritize Emily's emotional well-being, custody will remain with her temporary guardian, Mrs. Jensen, while visitation rights are granted to both Mrs. Parker and Mrs. Miller. This arrangement will allow Emily to build relationships with both women in a safe and stable environment. As the gavel struck, Emily felt a mixture of relief and uncertainty. The battle wasn't over. But for the first time, she felt that her voice had been heard. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step toward the peace and safety she had longed for. The courtroom was still as the judge prepared to deliver his decision. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the words that would shape Emily Parker's future. The judge's voice was calm, yet firm, as he spoke. This court has carefully considered all the evidence, testimonies, and, most importantly, Emily's own wishes. Custody will remain temporarily with her guardian, Mrs. Jensen, to provide Emily with a stable and neutral environment. During this time, both Mrs. Parker and Mrs. Miller will have scheduled visitation rights. The judge continued, his gaze moving between Lauren Parker and Samantha Miller. This arrangement allows Emily to build relationships with both women while ensuring her emotional well-being is the top priority. Ultimately, Emily will have the opportunity to decide the path that feels right for her. As the gavel struck, signaling the end of the hearing, A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Emily sat quietly, clutching her bear. Her emotions a whirlwind. It wasn't a definitive ending. But it was a chance to breathe. To figure out where she belonged on her own terms. In the days that followed, Lauren surprised everyone. She had fought so hard during the trial. But now she seemed different, softer. Quieter. She visited Emily during her first scheduled visitation with a small gift, a leather-bound journal with Emily's name embossed on the cover. "I thought you might like this," Lauren said. Her voice gentle. "You can write or draw in it, anything you want." They sat together in the kitchen at Mrs. Jensen's house. Lauren didn't press Emily for answers or try to defend herself. Instead, she listened as Emily spoke about school and her favorite subjects. It wasn't much, but it felt like a start. Later that week, a letter arrived for Emily. The envelope was plain, but the handwriting was unmistakably Lauren's. Emily hesitated before opening it, her hands trembling slightly. "Dear Emily, I know I've made mistakes, so many mistakes, but I want you to know how much I love you. You are the best thing in my life. And I am so proud of you for your courage and strength. Letting go is the hardest thing I've ever done. But I know it's what's best for you. You deserve to feel safe, to be happy, and to become the incredible person I've always known you could be. I hope that one day you can forgive me for the times I let you down. I'll always be here if you need me. With all my love. Mom." Tears blurred Emily's vision as she read the letter. She didn't know if she could forgive Lauren just yet. But for the first time, she saw her mother trying to put Emily's needs first. The journey wasn't over. But this felt like a step toward healing. For Emily, the most important thing was finally clear: she was no longer trapped in someone else's story. This was her life. And she was learning to write her own chapters. The sun was warm and inviting as Emily Parker sat on a blanket in the park with Samantha Miller. Around them, children laughed and played, their joy blending with the rustle of leaves in the breeze. Samantha had brought a picnic basket filled with sandwiches, fruit, and homemade cookies. But it wasn't the food that caught Emily's attention, it was the small sketchpad and set of colored pencils Samantha pulled out. "I thought you might like these," Samantha said softly, handing them to Emily. "I heard you used to love drawing." Emily hesitated, staring at the pencils in her hands. It had been years since she'd let herself pick up a pencil to draw. Lauren had called it a waste of time. But here was Samantha, encouraging her without judgment. Slowly, Emily opened the sketchpad and began to draw the towering oak tree in front of them. Samantha watched quietly, a warm smile on her face. "You're really talented, Emily," she said. For the first time, Emily felt proud of something she had created. During supervised visits, Lauren Parker was different. She no longer tried to control every conversation or force apologies. Instead, she listened. One afternoon, she arrived with a small bag of pastries from Emily's favorite bakery. "I thought these might brighten your day," Lauren said, her voice soft. They talked about simple things: school, books, and movies. Lauren didn't push for anything deeper. And Emily appreciated the change. As their visit ended, Emily surprised herself. "Thanks, Mom," she said quietly. The word slipped out naturally. And for the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. Lauren's eyes filled with tears. But she simply smiled and nodded. Emily's life wasn't perfect. But it was hers now. Between Samantha's patience and Lauren's efforts to change, she was beginning to heal. Sitting in her room one evening, sketchpad in hand, Emily looked out the window and whispered to herself, "Life isn't perfect. But it's mine now. And that makes all the difference."